Hi, Parkav. My name is Joel Houston, and I'm a professor of theology at Briarcrest College and Seminary, and it's a pleasure to share with you in worship and in the ministry of the Word today on Sunday, November 21st. Just by way of connecting a little bit of what we're going to talk on Sunday with our small groups, I've prepared just a few questions for us to go over, and I'll read these for you, but I know they're going to be available and typed up for you to discuss in your groups. But today, in addressing Hebrews chapter 11, verses 13 through 16, we run into the priority of faith and how faith really functions in our lives as believers. And really an important part of understanding this message is understanding the way in which the Christians that the pastor of Hebrews was writing to were in a place of discouragement. They were oppressed by the government. They were seeing, maybe even some of their own fellow congregants turning back to Judaism or perhaps forsaking the faith altogether, and they were feeling a little bit low. And so the pastor of Hebrews writes really what is a long sermon, and kind of right near the end in chapter 11, a couple of chapters before the end, really hammers the priority of faith, and that's where I want to pick it up for us today. So, really my first question, maybe it's a bit of a personal one, but it's a question, do you ever feel discouraged? I know it's a bit of a setup because, of course, we all feel discouraged, but maybe, when we think about it, do you ever feel discouraged in relation to your faith walk? And if so, what do you find discouraging, right? I mean, maybe it's, we're coming back to church and some folks aren't attending with us anymore, or maybe we feel like our prayer life is drying up, or maybe, again, we've seen people walk away from the faith. So again, first question, do you find yourself discouraged? And if so, what do you find discouraging? And maybe as a follow-up to that, do you ever feel a temptation to kind of cover it up, right? Act like it's all okay. Maybe as Christians, we feel like we need to have the joy of the Lord sort of always flowing through us. We need to show that all the time. Do you ever feel the need to act like it's all okay, maybe when it isn't? Okay. Second question. As we know, the Christians that the pastor of Hebrews is writing to are also discouraged, and they're tempted to revert to their old ways of life. And so the question for us is, what familiar patterns do we engage in to find comfort? And even maybe when we know that they're not ultimately the most helpful for us, right? And this could be something as simple as like, maybe it's Friday night, and instead of, getting into the Word and spending some time in prayer, we just kind of want to veg out, right? We're going to watch some TV. Nothing wrong, again, at all with TV, but, is that a pattern that we're engaging in that isn't actually building up our faith? Good question. Question number 3, what is faith? When we look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, and I encourage you to just turn there, it sounds simple enough in terms of a definition of faith, but what is the pastor actually saying that faith is? I'd encourage you to just talk about that with the group. Do we have a sense of what he's actually getting at? In Hebrews 11, verse 2, the pastor explains why faith is actually necessary, or to put it a different way, why faith is beneficial in our lives. And the idea here, the pastor says, that by faith, the people of old received their commendation. So the question is, what does that mean for us, right? If the people of old received their commendation, their praise, from the faith that they showed, what does that mean for us? Are people going to look back on our faith and are we going to receive a commendation or a condemnation, right? It's a good question. Question number 5, are faith and reason opposed to each other, right? It's often supposed that people of faith are unreasonable, or they don't live evidence-based lives. We hear a lot today about following the science. Not a lot of people talk about following the faith. Is this how the pastor of Hebrews thinks about it? Does he see faith and reason as being separate from each other, or being an extension one of another? Is there a relationship there? Question number 6, simple. Why is faith necessary in our lives? Can we just get by without it? Do we need faith? Why is it necessary? Question number 7. We are often told when we're discouraged to have faith, maybe even have more faith, right? And I think that's a correct intuition. But according to the pastor of Hebrews, how is it that faith actually helps us when we're discouraged, right? Like, what is it about faith that's actually helping us? Because that, I think, is going to go a long way to help us understand why we need to have it, right? It doesn't always help us. Maybe if we're feeling sad or maybe even depressed and somebody says, well, don't be sad. And you're sort of like, well, what am I supposed to do about that, right? I mean, how do I move through this? Okay, so how does faith actually help us when we're discouraged? Number 8, it one of the things we're going to talk about in this sermon, or have talked about, is that it actually takes an enormous amount of effort to cooperate with the gift of faith that God's given us. A healthy spiritual life doesn't really happen accidentally. So what tangible steps can we engage in today to become people of faith and so receive our commendation from God? So here, what I'm really looking for in your small groups is really just discussing, like, what are the things that we're doing right now that are building that muscle of faith, right? I think sometimes we run into this idea that, well, if I just sort of wait, God's going to kind of give me a more of an injection of faith, and that's certainly possible. But what are the things that we can do to open ourselves to that gift of God in increasing measure? Maybe even just like a bit of a clue to that last question, then I'll sign off. Think about the way that you increase your faith in anything. Okay, so maybe don't think about faith in God. It could be, faith in technique at work, right? Maybe it could be faith in your investments in a stock market. Maybe it could be faith in your relationships with your coworkers, right? That they're going to be healthy and productive. How do we increase that faith?